going to talk about making homes and making sustainable homes and how we can think about where we would live, where we can live, rather than where we have to live at the moment. A little bit of context is the two crises potentially we're facing at the moment. One is a crisis of affordable housing. We don't have enough homes, we've got long lists, we've lost a lot of our council housing, so through right to buy, through lack of government grant funding now, through all sorts of kind of political moves that have meant that local authorities no longer have in-house architects, or if they do, they're beginning to reconstruct those departments. So it's not necessarily negative, it's a changing scenario. But we have lost a lot of our housing and our land. The second crisis, I'm sure everyone is aware of, is the climate crisis. And just interested in the fact that building and construction are responsible for a large proportion. I've seen different figures for this, but we'll stick with this for now. Both in use, so in-use carbon production, and in terms of the actual construction process itself. So there's embodied carbon within every building we're in, and there's the carbon that's produced by heating, lighting, all of these things. So I'm going to show you a couple of projects that start to look at different exemplary ways of developing kind of low carbon, but low carbon communities. So it's not just about the fabric, but about the ways that communities are built through new housing. This first project is in Suffolk, so it's a rural village with a lot of people priced out of the housing market because of commuting. So there's a train line that goes to the village and the prices are very high. The site is in white at the bottom right hand corner, and it was a competition that we won, run by the RIBA. And it's for 26 homes. So there was this, what was a kind of slightly marshy ground at the edge of the village. This was the proposal we made, which is 26 houses, and actually it's 22 houses, 4 flats. And they work as staggered blocks. So they kind of take the footprint of the village around it, and they work as groups of 3 houses, and they're staggered to let light through. So the roofs are canted or sloping to let light come into the back. And all of the houses are orientated north-south. So these not very clear diagrams just show some of the principles that we set out right at the beginning of this competition, one of which is all houses face south, so we can capture as much solar gain, passive solar gain, as possible. Next is that pedestrians have priority across the site. This is not to be a car-dominated site, but we want to make it safe for children, for cyclists, for the people that live there. All houses have gardens, so everyone has a piece of outside space. And finally, village space, so that communal space or community space is given a kind of balance to the private space as well. So there's a sense, so how do you build community? And that was one of the questions we were really interested in within this scenario. You can see here that we've got staggered blocks of houses. So the 3 houses allow, the stagger allows them to see beyond each other, so you're not looking into your neighbour's bedroom. You can have windows in the gables looking out, but also then it gives a small grouping, so that there's a grouping across the site. And there's 3 key gardens made by these groupings, one of which is wildflowers, another is children's play, another is allotments, and then there's a sports field as well. And this is the principle of the north-south orientation. So you can see the roofs are sloping to let low winter sun into the houses behind in each group. They all have large glazings facing south, but it faces the largest openings are onto the landings where you can have roof lights and have natural ventilation. All the water was actually, this was an earlier one, we collected all the water underground and it fed all the toilets, so there was a recycling process built in. And there was a sense that whilst you need to use energy, you can minimize it as much as is possible. And then the embodied carbon, so the carbon that is locked into the building because of the construction process, so how far things come to be building the properties, but also how much heat is lost through the fabric and how you keep it warm. So there's a lot of, what we used for this is hempcrete. So you can see it being harvested. It was harvested locally, and it's hemp, effectively, mixed with a small amount of cementatious material to make an insulating block that, and on the right you can see the differences in the kind of heat loss between the two. We work with a local community. So what was great about this project, it was set up by the Suffolk Preservation Society, and they and the Housing Association had already identified everyone who was going to move into the houses. So we worked with the school and brought the kids to site, but also explained to them the principles. Because one of the problems with sustainable housing is that you set up systems, but people don't really know how to use them, or they're not told properly how to use them. And there's a gap between performance and the actual ambition of the project. And we were very keen to kind of address that and work with the community from the beginning. So there was a housing association formed right at the start of the project. And all the kids, well, they're probably kind of teenagers. They are teenagers now. But they moved into the houses, and they also came to site and watched as we built them. Now, the principle of this is it's a timber frame house. It was built as if it's inside out. So normally you see timber frame and you'll see the cladding on the outside. Here it looks like kind of half timbered housing. The timber's on the outside. And then across the whole site, it was sprayed with this hemp. So the hemp is mixed up, sprayed into the frames, and allowed to dry. And it goes through 500 millimetres deep, so half a metre, to provide the insulation. And then it's scraped back to the frame for the fronts and backs. And it's, well, at this point, it's kind of quite a lovely material, I think. What we did was the north and south elevations and the roofs were all clad in cedar. And you can see this is a site photograph, obviously, of just the process of building, where the cedar is wrapped along the top and around the sides. The walls to the gardens were built with mud blocks, so they're not fired, again, reducing their carbon footprint, to build these curved walls to the edges. And this is the finished product, where we used cedar to cap the walls, because the hemp needs to be kept off the ground and protected from the top. And you can see also the big windows are catching the light. And then all the hemp is lime rendered to keep it from weather damage, basically, and it sits upon that brick plinth. And we worked with local Suffolk builders to use original colours for the lime wash on it. And this is the view. To the left, you can see there's the wildflower meadow. And then every house has its recessed front porch and garden. And then there's, this is the north faces, so you get the small gardens. And then to the south, there's recessed kitchens overlooking the children's play area. So this is one of the community gardens in the middle of the screen, where the kitchens overlook. And then this is the allotments that were set up again. The Tenants Association set them up in advance, and we allocated these as we were building the project, so that these communal gardens balance with the private. And this is a view across the whole field, and you can see just about that these have dips and hollows in this, and this is about for making a SUD system, which is a system of sustainable drainage. So there's swales, dips that run through the site, and they keep the water within them, so that the whole project doesn't have sitting water in it, but you can walk on the swales, and we made the footpaths take those paths as well. And the small pitch in the middle that was as drained as possible down to those sustainable drains, so that the kids could play football whatever the weather. And the playground is just behind them. So there was a series of play spaces alongside the houses. And then this is going back to the diagram, the pedestrian route through the site. To the south of each block of houses is a pedestrian route that allows you to walk right through to the village without crossing the traffic. So again, it's about making it safe for children and allowing children to be able to get to the centre of the village and to the school. And this is one of the hallways with the large facing south window, obviously before inhabitation, and above it there's a roof light so that it gathers the heat. You can open the roof light and let the heat out. And we made the biggest windows onto the landing, so the habitable rooms didn't heat up individually, but you could open doors to the landing and get warm air from that, or open all your doors and get natural ventilation up through it. allied to this, there was a biomass boiler, or there is a biomass boiler that heats all the houses, so there's a local community heating system as well. This project is in Norwich, and it's 96 houses altogether in the end. And when we did the competition, we looked at the Golden Triangle, which is an area of housing where everyone wants to live, apparently, we were told. I came from Norwich, I was at school there as well, so I kind of have a great fondness for the city. And what we looked at was the kind of makeup of the city that people found the most enjoyable, and it was this terrace housing, and we were really interested in the actual dimensions of it and how we might work with the fabric of the city to make a new place or a new set of houses that had a relationship to the existing fabric. And we analysed this traditional street, and then it was originally called Greyhound Opening at competition stage. We looked at how we might take that rhythm and slip it so that south-facing, all of them get front gardens, and then we put communal gardens or communal routes through the gardens at the back to make a different kind of rhythm, but keeping the same proportions as the original streets. And here's just showing how those proportions get carried across. These diagrams again talk about pedestrian priorities, home zones and green spaces and how we could link them up. And this section, and I think one of the reasons for showing the first project is that this Goldsmith Street kind of takes that section of heat trapping, south-facing, massively insulated housing and develops it into a kind of urban street pattern. And this section just shows how those houses stack up across north to south. So south is to the right of the screen at the section at the top. And these were, and so we looked at what we were asked to provide, which is a mixture of flats and houses. And the buildings on the corners provide the flats, and the houses provide this internal grain between them. These were early sketches looking at the public spaces and how they fit with the fabric. Passive house, so massively insulated, sealed, triple glazing, estimates of £150 per year for the bills for heating, apparently. These are renders we did at planning, looking at the spaces we were making. Just realising I've got not time. And this is a ginnel, they're called. It's the spaces between the back houses, which are kind of for residents to use. And also when you go there, you see the kids racing around this, coming out the back, coming out the front, and using it as a circuit. And we're quite interested in that kind of sense of placemaking where people can navigate and work their way around sites. And this is the built product. So you can see the windows are smaller, but within larger openings, because for passive house, you have to have slightly smaller windows because of heat loss and its performance. But here you're looking at a south-facing elevation where they have front gardens onto the street. These are the flats. And each flat has its own front door, and this was very deliberate. We wanted to make spaces where you entered directly into your flat and you didn't end up with the problems of communal space, but you also, everyone had a kind of a stake in the public realm as well. And you can see there were 15 different colours of front doors. Here's some of them. You see some are to upper flats, some are to houses, but they start to make a kind of rhythm of the street, and you can navigate your way to your own home. Just wanted to talk briefly, following that, about just one other thing that we're talking about new houses, but we have a massive existing housing stock, which is not carbon proofed and needs a huge amount of investment. And I think one of the things, going back to the kind of statistics earlier, is that we really need to take VAT off refurbishment in this country and build in a way that allows us to meet our carbon targets. So, yeah, I think we all need a good home, and we have a lot of people in our country that need good homes as well. Thank you.